Begin the Gemara today towards the bottom of Daf Yudal Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom of the page where it says Loi. So the Gemara here brought a halacha and then the 2 brises, then another brise here that the Gemara is discussing when you send a gift with a shliach to deliver to someone. And it turns out that that person passed away. So what do you do with it now? Do you have to give it to the person's yarshim, or do you just give it back to the mishaleach, to the one that sent it? Or what happens if even the mishaleach himself also passed away? So now how do you return it? Do you return it to the yarshim of the mishaleach, or do you give it to the yarshim of the person that it was sent to? So the brisa here, there were various opinions about this. Now the Gemara tried to explain that the argument brought in the brisa about this is based on 2 points. Point number 1 is when the person that sent it to be delivered, what was his intention? Do I say, Haylech kezachi dami, when he gives it to the shliach to deliver, he's basically saying to him, you be zayche in it for the recipient. So even before the recipient got it, he was already zayche in it for that person. So even if he passed away, you're going to have to give it to his yarshim. That's one point that the Gemara says this will depend upon. Another point the Gemara brings over here is mitzvah lekayim divrei hames. That when a person says something, when he's alive, that he wants something done, even if he said it as a body, he was a fully healthy person. But nevertheless, now he passes away, there's a mitzvah to fulfill what he says. So therefore, there would be a mitzvah to give it to the recipient or even to the children of the recipient because it's a mitzvah to fulfill what this person wanted. So that's the shaila. Is there such a mitzvah or is there not such a mitzvah? That's the way the Gemara explained this until now. But here the Gemara is going to give a second option of how to explain this because the Gemara is looking to say that this concept of haylech kezachi or not haylech kezachi is not a machlekes, and therefore we can give a different hesber for this machlekes who we give this gift that now it's not clear who it should go to. There could be a different explanation here. Okay, so let's see in the words of the Gemara.
Haylech kezachi and shliach lekabbalah, shliach lehalacha, two different things. Or?
Yeah. Haylech kezachi means when you send a shliach lehalacha, sending him to deliver a matana. But when you give it to the shliach lahalacha, do we say that it's equivalent to you telling him be zayche in it, and therefore he's zayche in it for the person that he's delivering it to? Shliach lekabbalah is a different story. Shliach lekabbalah is when that recipient sent the shliach to take it. So then for sure the shliach that was sent is zayche for him because he was sent as a shliach to receive it. Okay, let's see inside the words of Gemara. Says the Gemara, loi, the explanation we said before, that this will depend whether when you send haylech to deliver, are you zayche in it for the recipient? It's not necessarily dependent on that. Bibari, if the mishaleach, the one sending the gift, was a healthy person, the kula amole pligi, nobody would argue, and Rashi over here says what the Gemara means is nobody would argue that when you send to deliver, it's not equivalent to zachi. The shliach is not zayche in it for the recipient. But v'hacha b'mayaskinon, what are we speaking about over here? B'shchiv mirah, about a person that's on his deathbed and he's passing away. Or b'plukta, the Rabbi Laza, v'Rabbanan kamifliki. And the argument in this brisa here is the same argument that there is between Rabbi Laza and the Rabbanan. When a shchiv mirah says something, what validity does his words have? Is it as if what he said took effect with a kinyan or not? The Tanan, so we learned in the Mishnah, Hamachalik Nechasav Al Piv, a person that is on his deathbed and he decides to distribute his possessions the way he wants, not the way the Yerusha would be naturally, that each child gets his portion, but he wants to divide it differently. Rabbi Laza says, Echad Bari ve'echad Mesukin, whether this is a healthy person that decides to divide his properties in his own personal way, or it's a person that's mesukin, he's on his deathbed. So you have to have a proper kinyan for this to take effect. So therefore, when it comes to properties, means pieces of land, real estate. Niknin, so there's the proper kinyan that has to be done for that. What kinyan is it? The kesef, or b'shtar, or b'chazakeh, either through money, or through a document, or through a proper chazakeh in the property itself. Then if you have items that are movable items, that they cannot, there's no achrayis for them because it can be moved from one place or another. So regarding those things, what kind of a kinyan do you need for it? So the kinyan usually for such kind of items is with meshicha. You pull it, you bring it into your possession, into your property. Basically the point that Rabbi Laza is saying is that a shchiv merah is no different than a healthy person. Just like by a healthy person, you need a proper kinyan for anything he wants to give anyone to take effect. A shchiv merah is the same thing. Just because he says he wants it to go to someone, it will not take effect without a proper kinyan. However, Chachamim disagree. Elu ve'elu, both, whether it's real estate or whether it's movable items, niknim ba'amira. When it comes to a shchiv merah, a person that's on his deathbed, so just with his words, when he says, I want this to go to this and this person, the words itself creates a kinyan, that it belongs to this person. This is the source of what we had many times before in the Gemara, that by a shchiv merah, you don't need an actual kinyan. Just words alone, it's like the kinyan was done. And this is Chachamim instituted this, in order for the shchiv merah not to get frustrated that he doesn't know if his words are going to be fulfilled or not. So now Amrullah, the Chachamim say to Rabbi Elazar that disagree with this concept. There was a story like this. Maise be'imon shel b'nei Reichel. There was a story with the mother of b'nei Reichel. The children, the father's name was Reichel. Shahisa chayla, so she was sick, she was a shchiv merah. Va'amra, and she just said, Tinasein kibinasi lebiti. My kibinasi, which is some kind of piece of jewelry, a chain, an expensive chain that she had, it should be given to my daughter. We're on the top of Tezvav Amud Aleph. And the value of this piece of jewelry is 12 mana. She just said it. There was no kinyan made. Now the Umeisa, she passed away. The Kaibo Chachamim is Dvareh, and the Chachamim fulfilled what she said. So I see over here that by a shchiv merah, without any kinyan, the words take effect. Amalahem, Rabbi Elazar responded to this and said, don't bring me any rai from that story. B'nei Reichel, these people, that the children of this man by the name of Reichel, tikberem imam, let their mother bury them. So Rashi explains that don't mention their name in the Beis Medrash. You can't prove anything of the way Chachamim paskin regarding to them, because lav dafka Chachamim paskin properly regarding them, because they were over on Avedis. Which Aveda were they over on? So Rashi actually says they were over on an Aveda, which was a machlekes between Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim in this Braisa, whether it's an Aveda or not. And that's the Aveda of Kalayim. They had, in their vineyard, they had thorns growing there. And the question is, allowing these thorns to grow in their vineyard, is that an Aveda or not? These thorns that grew there are not humanly edible foods at all. So why should it be kalayim? According to Rabbi Elazar, because it's food that can be eaten by the animals, it's still considered to be kalayim. So therefore Rabbi Elazar says, they were b'nei Aveda. They didn't take the kaitzim, these thorns, out of their kalayim. Chachamim disagreed. Chachamim said, no, that's not called kalayim. It can't be eaten even by behemoths. It's not called kalayim. So therefore Chachamim said, we can learn out from the story that happened with them. Okay, so what are we taking out of this brayse here? Here is a machlekes regarding a shchiv merah. When a shchiv merah says something, do I say that it does not take effect unless you make a proper kinyan, just like any healthy person? Or do I say shchiv merah is different? The Chachamim instituted that the words of shchiv merah is like done, like the kinyan took effect already just by the words alone. So the Gemara says that is the machlekes here regarding a person that was sending a gift to someone. When did he send a gift? He sent it with a shliach when he was a shchiv merah. Now the question is whether the recipient should get it or not. So says the Gemara, Tanakame Rabbi Elazar. The Tanakame in the Braisa before that said that when you sent the gift and it turns out that that person passed away, what do? You give it back to the person that sent it. Why do you give it back to him? Because he holds like Rabbi Elazar. Since there was no kinyan here, so it didn't take effect. So if the person that was sent to passed away, give it back to the one that sent it. That's the Tanakama. Rav Nos and Rav Yaakov Nami, Rav Elazar. Rav Nos and Rav Yaakov that continue, and they say in the Braisa, in a case where the Mishaleach himself passed away, so what do? You give it back to the Yarshim of the Mishaleach. You don't give it back to the recipient. You give it back, not the person himself that sent it passed away, you give it to his Yarshim. So Rav Nos and Rav Yaakov Nami, Rav Elazar. They also agreed to Rav Elazar, there's no reason to give it to the recipient because there was no kinyan done. Now, Afagav the miss. And Rav Nasr and Yaakov are saying a further halacha, that even though the person that sent it passed away, loy amrinan mitzvah l'kayim divrei emes. They do not hold of this concept that once a person passes away, we have a mitzvah now to fulfill what his desire was. There's no such mitzvah. So you just give it back. You give it back to his yarshim. Now, then the next opinion in the Braisa that says that you give it to the yarshim of the person that it was sent to him. Why? Kirabana. They hold like the opinion of the Rabbana that say that by a shchiv merah, once the shchiv merah says something, it's like a kinyan was done. So over here, you're going to have to give it to the recipient or to the yarshim of the recipient. Rav Yehuda Nasi Shama Mishum Rab Meir. Rav Yehuda Nasi, he says in the name of Rab Meir. So what is his opinion? Rabbi Lazar. He holds like Rabbi Lazar that really, when you send something a shchiv mira without any kinyan, it should go back to the sender. But over here, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi brings the name of Rabbi Lazar that Miu Heiche de Mis. If the sender passed away, Amrinon Mitzvah Lakayim Divrei Ames. True, the kinyan of a shchiv mira does not take effect there, or the halacha of a shchiv mira does not apply. But there's another concept that even if he was healthy, there's a mitzvah to be mekayim what he wants once he passed away. So only when the sender passed away should you give it to the children of the recipient. The Chachamim, then the next opinion in the Braisa was the Chachamim. They said yachloiku, that in such a case you just divide it between the children of the sender and the children of the recipient, because they have mesapkalu, they have a suffix who you paskin like, so therefore you just split it. And the Khan and then in Bavel, the Braisa said before that it was said that the halacha would be shuda, that you just choose, the shliach himself chooses who to give it to. He has to choose and to see himself, did the mishaleach really want that it should go to the children of the recipient or not? So therefore, this is a concept of shuda. Usually the concept of shuda is brought regarding a bezdin. Chachamim, a bezdin, when they can't determine who something belongs to, so the bezdin itself has to use their intuition, or they just choose who to give it to. So over here, the shliach, since there's a suffix who to give it to, he uses his intuition to decide who to give it to. Shuda, that's better than splitting it. You split it, each one gets half. Shuda is a better idea. And then the final opinion that's brought in the Braisa before was with Rab Shimon Hanasi, Maisa Asalashmina. Rab Shimon Hanasi says an actual story that happened with him himself, and Rab Shimon Hanasi says that it goes back to the Yarishim of the sender, of the Mishaleach, meaning that Rab Shimon Hanasi, according to this interpretation here, is basically paskening that by a shchiv mira, the words of a shchiv mira is not a kinyan, so it goes back to the one that sent it. That's the pshat in the Braisa. The Gemara asks here a question on a small point here regarding this name, Rab Shimon Hanasi. What does this mean? Rab Shimon Hanasi, Nasi who? When it says Rab Shimon Hanasi, does it mean that Rab Shimon himself was actually a Nasi? So apparently we don't find anywhere else where it says clearly that he was a Nasi in his times. This is one of the only places that this, or maybe the only place where this comes up. So does it mean that Rab Shimon himself was actually a Nasi? Or it's just in short to say that Rab Shimon repeated this in the name of someone else, which was the Nasi. So the Gemara says, I'll prove this to you. Rav Yosef, which was in a later generation, he was in an Amayra, and he uses the same expression. He said, Halachik Rab Shimon Hanasi. We paskin like Rab Shimon Hanasi. So if Rav Yosef, which is an Amayra, is saying this, it sounds like that Rab Shimon was actually the Nasi. Says the Gemara, but vadayin tibayalach. No, you can't prove from Rav Yosef's expression. Rab Shimon Nasi. You can still ask the same question. Nasi who? Oy, the Ka'ama Mishmei the Nasi. Did Rav Yosef mean to say that he's the Nasi, or he's saying this is in the name of the Nasi? So Taisus over explains that the Gemara thought to say that Rav Yosef would explain more than the Braisa, so therefore you could prove from what Rav Yosef is saying, but maybe Rav Yosef is just using the same expression as the Braisa itself. He's referring to him as Rab Shimon Ha-Nasi, even if he himself was not the Nasi. Okay, but what do we see over here? What did Rav Yosef say? We paskin like Rab Shimon Ha-Nasi, that when a person sends a gift and the person that he sent it to, the recipient, passed away, what do? You give it back to the Yarishim of the Mishaleach. That means even if the sender himself passed away, so you give it to his Yarishim. Frag the Gemara, how could you say this? That halacha is like Gufa. So looking at this statement that Rav Yosef here said, Rav Yosef, halacha Rab Shimon Nasi. We passing like Rab Shimon Nasi, but v'hakaim alone, don't we know the halacha is divrei shchiv mira, the words of a shchiv mira, kiksuvenu kimsurin dami. It's like it's written and signed and given over. It's like a kinyan was done. So how over here are we paskening based on the pshat that we said before, that this Braisa is also speaking about a shchiv mira? And over here you're saying that we passing like Rab Shimon, that the words of a shchiv mira are worthless. And if he passed away, if the recipient passed away, you give it back to the Yarishim of the Mishaleach. It just goes back. And says the Gemara, Rav Yosef, Moikila Bebari. Rav Yosef that says that we passing like Rab Shimon Nasi here, it must be that Rav Yosef learns that this Braisa is talking about a regular, healthy individual. It's not a shchiv mira. If it was a shchiv mira, then we would have to fulfill his words, and we would give it to the Yarishim of the recipient, not back to the Mishaleach. Another question the Gemara asks, even if it's speaking about a person that's a body. But the question would be, it says, who do you give it back to, even if the Mishaleach himself died? you give it back to his children. But the question is why? The kaimelon, don't we know the halacha is mitzvah lakayim divrei hameis? If a person says something when he's healthy and then he passes away, there's a mitzvah to fulfill what the meis says, and therefore we should give it to the children of the recipient. Answers the Gemara, Tini, you're right, according to Rav Yosef, you're going to have to learn in the Braisa, change the words of the Braisa, Yachsaru l'mishaleach. Not like we had before in the Braisa, that you give it back to the children of the Mishaleach. When the Mishaleach passed away, no, then you wouldn't give it back to his children, because then you have to fulfill what he wants and give it to the recipient. Yachsaru l'mishaleach. If the sender is alive, so then you give it back to the Mishaleach. Hadron Allah Hamevi Kama. This is the conclusion of the first Perek of Hamevi of Masechta Gittin. Okay, the next Perek starts with the same words, Hamevi Get, which is the second Hamevi Get. Continuing the halachis of a shliach that brings a get from Medina Sayam, as we learned in the first mission of the Perek, a shliach that brings a get from Medina Sayam has to testify about the kashrus of the get, b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam, that the get was written and signed in front of me. Sagt Heilige Mishneh, Hamevi get from Medina Sayam, a shliach is delivering a get from overseas to Eretz Yisrael. And he didn't bring the full testimony for what happened. V'amar b'fanei nichtav. He says, the get was written in front of me. Avoloi b'fanei nechtam. It wasn't signed in front of me. B'fanei nechtam. Or the reverse. He said it was signed in front of me. Avoloi b'fanei nechtam. It wasn't written in front of me. Or b'fanei nichtav kuloi. The entire get was written in front of me, but b'fanei nechtam chetzei. Only half of the signatures, only one signature of the two Eidim was in front of me. Or b'fanei nichtav chetzei. Only half of the get was written in front of me. Or b'fanei nechtam kuloi. Both signatures were in front of me. So in all of these cases, pasul. The get will be pasul because he's not fulfilling the takanas chachamim to testify fully b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam, that it was all written and signed in front of him. So it's pasul. Now, what's if the case here is echad oimer b'fanei nichtav? One shliach says that the get was written in front of him, and the echad oimer b'fanei nechtam, and another shliach says that it was signed in front of him. So then it will be pasul. Then the get will be pasul. So Rashi here actually brings two pshatim for this. The Gemara is going to discuss this later. Either the case over here is that only one of them is a shliach, and the other one that's testifying is not a shliach. So then it's understood why the get would be pasul, because the shliach himself, the takana tachamim is the shliach has to testify both, that it was written and signed in front of him. The other person that's testifying that it was signed in front of him is not a shliach. So the shliach is not fulfilling what he has to in order to validate this get. Or Rashi says, even if both of them are a shliach, it's still, the Gemara will later explain, it's going to be pasul because Chachamim instituted that the one that's saying b'fanei nichtav, he has to be the one to say b'fanei nechtam. And the reason is, the Gemara explained this already before in Daf Gimel, we don't want this verification of a get to be confused with the verification when we come to be mekayim any other shtar. Has to be a very clear difference between a shtar and a get. Because if you confuse the two, you may come to trust an eid echad for every shtar, just like you trust an eid echad for a get. What did Chachamim do in order to make a clear difference between them? That by a get, you don't only have to testify about the signatures, you have to testify about the writing of the get as well. So over here, if the shliach that's saying b'fanei nechtam is not adding the b'fanei nichtav, it's another shliach that's saying it, there's room to confuse the get with a regular shtar, so therefore it's going to be pasul. That's another get. A regular document, a money document, where you want to verify the signatures. So we don't want to confuse that kind of a document with a get. Another case, shnayim oimrim b'fanei nichtav. If you have two shluchim that are delivering this get, and they're both saying it was written in front of us, then you have a third shliach, and he comes and says b'fanei nechtam that it was signed in front of him. Pasul, it's also going to be pasul. So here again, similar svara Rashi says, because the shliach that's saying b'fanei nechtam is one shliach, and he is not testifying about the writing of the get. In order for the edus of this shliach to be a edus, Chachamim said that he has to say the testimony for the signatures and for the writing of the get. And that one shliach, that third shliach, is not testifying about the writing of the get. But Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. But Rabbi Yehuda machsher, Rabbi Yehuda says it will be kosher because, true, this shliach that's testifying about the signature of the get is not testifying about the writing of it, but there is another shliach, or maybe another two shluchim, that are testifying about the writing of the get. So therefore that's enough that it should be clear that a get is different than any other shtar, and therefore this is acceptable, and the get is kosher.
Even though it didn't say both.
Even though this shliach did not say both, correct?
None of the shluchim said both.
Right, one shliach said b'fanei nichtav, or maybe two said b'fanei nichtav, and another shliach said b'fanei nechtam. But because there's also a testimony on the ksiva, which you don't have by a regular shtar, it's enough to make a distinction between a regular shtar and a get, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says it'll be kosher. If you have one shliach that says that the get was written in front of him, and then you have two shluchim that say that the get was signed in front of them, kosher. Then in this case, the get will be kosher. And this will be explained in the Gemara, as we'll see. Frek the Gemara, why is it necessary for the Mishnah here to teach me this halacha again? That the shliach delivering a get has to testify both that it was written and signed in front of him. This is the halacha that we learned in the beginning of the Masechta. Hamei get Medina Sayam. A shliach delivers a get to Eretz Yisrael from overseas. He has to testify for the kashrus of the get, and he has to testify both that it was written and signed in front of him. Why does the Mishnah have to specify again that if he says one without the other, that it won't be kosher? We see that from the first Mishnah. Answers the Gemara, if only the first Mishnah of the Masechta, Hava Min, I would say, tzarich, that he should testify this, but v'iloi ama kosher. If he does not testify for both, b'fanei nichtav and b'fanei nechtam, b'diyeved, it will still be kosher. Kamash Malon. Therefore, our Mishnah is specifying and saying that if you said one part without the other part of the testimony, it'll be possible. It's going to be what?
The get is possible, or the aid is not possible?
The get is considered to be possible. There's no Gedishin.
I should say the aid is not possible.
He only said half of the testimony that he was supposed to, so he didn't fulfill the Takanas Chachamim. You can't use this get for the Gedishin. That's the Takanas Chachamim.
You can't use the get, but they are possible.
No, he's not saying the Eidim are possible. The get is possible. The Eidim don't become possible. The next thing it said in the Mishnah, B'fanei nichtav chetzyai, or B'fanei nechtam kulai. He says that half of the get was written in front of him, and it was fully signed. Both signatures were in front of him. It's also possible. So the Gemara wants to understand when it says half of the get was written in front of him, hai chetzyai. Which half was written in front of the shliach? Ilem chetzi rishain. If you say this refers to the first half, now Rashi's pshat, when it says first half, Rashi says that means the half of the get where it says the real important information of a get. Every single get has two parts. We'll see later on in the Masechta. A get has what's called the taitif of the get and the taifis of the get. The taitif of the get is where it says the information that's unique for this get. The name of the ish, the name of the isha, and the date, which is this get. Then there's the standard nusach of the get that's written on every single get. That's called the taifis of the get. So the halacha that you have to know that the get was written properly lishma only applies to the taitif of the get, which is again the name of the ish, the isha, and this man. The standard nusach of the get could be written shalai lishma. So Rashi's pshat in our Gemara over here is chetzei risha, and if you're going to say that he saw the first half of the get written, which means the critical information of the get that's unique to this get, the taitif of the get. But if the shliach saw that, that's good enough because of ha'amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, if even only one line of the get was written l'shma, which refers to the name of the ish, the isha, and the date, shaven itzarech. The rest of the standard nusach of the get, you don't need for that anything l'shma. So why would you say here that the shliach testifying about the first half, it wouldn't be good? Answers the Gemara, Ravashi. So Ravashi says, Chetzye Achrein. Our Mishnah says that if the shliach is only testifying that he saw the other half of the get, not the standard nusach of the get, not the name of the ish and the isha, which has to be lishma. If that's what he's testifying about, so then that's worthless. So therefore the get will be possible. The next thing it said in the Mishnah was, if he said, B'fanei nichtav kulai, the get was written in front of him, and then B'fanei nichtam chetzye. Then regarding the signatures, he testifies that only one signature was in front of him and not the other signature. Pasul. So the get will be pasul. That's the halach of the Mishnah because you're not testifying about both signatures. So therefore it's pasul. Now, Rav Chisda comes and says a chiddush regarding this case. So as Rashi explains here, he's not coming to explain the pshat of the Mishnah. The pshat of the Mishnah is very simple and clear, that the get is pasul because he didn't testify about both signatures. But Rav Chisda comes and adds, what happens if the following thing, let's see. Rav Chisda, now, filish shnayim me'idim, achsimis yat sheni. That second signature that the shliach is not testifying about. If two eidim from the street come along and testify about the authenticity of that second signature, pasul. The get will still be pasul. Why would it be pasul? Seemingly, you have now a full validity of a get. The shliach is testifying about its writing, and about one signature he's also testifying that it's good. And in the second signature you have two eidim. Two eidim are always able to verify the signature of any document. So why shouldn't they be accepted here? My time, what's the reason for this? Says Rav Chisda, because we can't combine two different ways of validating signatures. Oy kuloi b'kiyum maget, or both signatures have to be validated by the special institution that Chachamim instituted the way a get would be validated, which is by the testimony of the shliach, testifying b'fanei nechtam that both were signed in front of me. Oy kuloi b'takanas Chachamim. Sorry, kiyum maget. So kiyum maget refers to the way every single shtar is usually validated. So kiyum maget, what's the way you usually validate a shtar? Not with the shliach's testimony, it has to be two eidim. So either you validate the signatures on this get the way every shtar is validated, which is with the testimony of two eidim, or the get will be validated by the special takanas chachamim that applies only to a shliach that delivers a get, and he alone could validate it. So you can't, in other words, you can't mix two different takanas chachamim together in order to validate a get. That's why it's going to be possible here. Okay, very big chiddush here. So on this, the Gemara asks, Maskef lo Rave. Rave asks on this that logically it's hard to accept this. Mi ikimidi. Do you ever find a case the ilu amachad kosher, that if one person would testify about this, then it would be accepted. It would be kosher. Hashtag iketrei. And now, because you have two witnesses testifying, pasul, it becomes pasul. So here, this shliach himself, if he would testify not only about one signature, but he himself would continue and testify about the second signature, so then it would be kosher. And Rashi actually adds to that, when the shliach testifies about the second signature, he doesn't even have to say that it was signed in front of me. He could just testify that I recognize the second signature. That's Rashi's shitta. That according to Rava, the shliach himself does not have to see the signature happening. It's enough that he says, I recognize the signature. So it would be kosher. According to this is Rashi. Most Rishonim disagree with Rashi. According to Rashi, even though it says in the Mishnah B'fanei Nichtam, Rava that says that the main thing here is to validate the signatures, it's enough that he says that he recognizes the signature.
There's no difference between a regular star and a get.
One, by a regular shtar, you need two eidim. Over here, one shliach alone is trusted to say that he recognizes the signature. And what's Rav Chisda saying? But now that you bring two eidim, it's going to be pasul. Doesn't make sense. If one person is trusted, why would you say that now that you have two eidim, it would be pasul? Elomar Rave. So on that, Rave says that this chiddush of Rav Chisda is not acceptable. But rather, if you want to say a chiddush about this case, I can give you the following chiddush. Afilu hu va'acher mi'idin achsim misyat sheni. What happens if this shliach here that delivered the get said the edus about one signature, he said it alone, that signature is kosher, and now regarding when it comes to the second signature, the shliach is saying testimony together with another aid, achsim misyat sheni, regarding the second signature, so then it's going to be pasul. So again, the first shliach is saying edus about one signature, and regarding the second signature, there are two eidim that are testifying about the second signature. Who are the two eidim that are testifying? The shliach himself, together with another shliach. So then it's going to be pasul. Also a huge chiddush. Why would it be pasul? So the Gemara explains, my time, why should this be pasul? Because asu la'achlufi b'kiyim shtaris ba'alma. Because if you're going to allow this get to be kosher, this could be confused with every other shtar in the world, where in such a case, by other shtaris, it would be pasul. And what is that? Here, first let's read the words of the Gemara inside, and then I'll explain. Rashi explains what's going on. The kanafik nachi rivid memayna apumid chatzada. Because if you are mekayim, a regular shtar, in this kind of a way, it comes out that 3/4 of the money is being used or is being taken out by the words of 1/8. So what does this mean? By a regular shtar, in order to be Mekayim a shtar, you have two ways. The truth is there's more than two ways, but two of the ways to be Mekayim a shtar are either the aid himself that signed the shtar comes and testifies about his signature that it's kosher. So then you have each aid that testifies about his own signature that it's kosher. That's one way. What happens if these aidim that signed are not around? There's another way how to verify signatures. You have other aidim from the street that recognize the signatures and they testify. So in such a case, when it's not the Eidim themselves, it's other people, so then you have to have 2 Eidim to verify one signatures and 2 Eidim to verify the second signature. Or you could have the same 2 Eidim verifying both signatures, but you need 2 Eidim to verify these signatures. So the Gemara in Ksubah says, what happens if you have a case where you have 2 signatures on a star, and one of these Eidim is alive, and comes and testifies about his signature. When it comes to the second signature on that star, that second aid is not here. He's passed away. So now, the same aid that's verifying his own signature wants to testify about the second signature together with the second aid from the street. Now there'll be 2 aidim to verify the second signature. Says the Gemara in Ksubis that it will be puzzle. Why is it possible? You have 2 Eidim testifying about the second signature. The answer is because it comes out now that you're kashering this star with 1 aid. 3/4 of this get or of this star is being kashered by 1 aid. Because his own signature, he's the one that's kashering it, which is 50% of the kashrus of the star. And then when it comes to the second signature, he is half of the testimony for the second signature. So that means that 3/4 of this star is being validated by 1 aid. So Rashi says, when the pasuk says, "Al pishnayim edim yakum davar," that you use 2 edim to validate something, it has to be that the concept is being validated, or the story, or the star is being validated by 2 edim equally. Over here, if a star is being validated 3/4 by 1 aid, and only 1/4 by 1 aid, that can't validate a star that way. That's the halacha by every star. So if so, says Rav over here says, when it comes to a get, if you're going to do the same thing, even though by a get itself it's not a problem, because by a get, Rashi says that by a get we have the takanas chachamim, that the shliach is believed alone. He doesn't even need this other person from the street. The shliach is saying that my signature is good, and the signature of the person from the street, the second signature is good. He doesn't even need the other person, b'chlal. Because you have here the special takanas chacham of b'fana nichta b'fana nechtam. So over here, by a get, this shouldn't be a problem at all. But nevertheless, chacham were geyser that if over here you're going to use a second person to be mitzdaref with you to kasher the second signature, it looks like 3/4 of this get is being kashered by 1 person, and it's going to be similar. People are going to make a mistake and think that by other shtaris you can do the same thing. So therefore, it's going to be puzzle. And asil achlufi became shtaris to alma in order not to confuse with other shtaris. The kanafik naki rividim amayna apum edachat sada. It would look like it comes out by another shtar. It's 3/4 of the money that's being taken out by the testimony of 1 aid. So over here it would look similar. So therefore, chacham wa geyser that over here in such a case it should be possible as well. But on this chiddush of Rav as well, maskeflo Ravashi asks, you can't say such a chiddush. It doesn't make sense. Mi ikke midi. Do you ever find such a thing? The ilu masik la iu lekule dibura kosher. If this person alone continues saying what he says, it would be kosher. Hashta de ikke chad bahadei. Now that he brings along a second person with him, pasul, it becomes pasul. So over here, if this shliach himself was testifying about both signatures, it would be fine. If he brings along a second person for the second signature, now all of a sudden it becomes possible, because you may confuse this with another star, but it doesn't make sense to say that you bring a second person along with you, it should make it possible. Hello, Ravashi. So therefore Ravashi says that if you want to say a chiddush regarding this case, you can say the following chiddush. Afilo oimer, if this shliach that delivered the get, and he's testifying about the first signature, that he saw it, that it's kosher, and then he says about the second signature, Ani hu eicheni. I am the second signature. I'm the shliach, but I'm also the one that signed the second signature. Pasul. Then in such a case, it's going to be pasul. My time, what's the reason? Oi kuloi b'kiyam maget. Because over here, Rav Ashi brings back a similar svara that Rav Chisda said before. Because when you come to verify the kashrus of a get, or you use the mechanism that's used for every shtar, that you have to have proper witnesses to testify for it, or another way to be mekayim every single shtar is when the aid himself is testifying about his signature, or you use the special takanas achamim, which is regarding a get, that a shliach, one shliach is believed for this. Over here in this case, for the first signature, he's testifying as a shliach. For the second signature, he's not testifying as a shliach. He's testifying and saying that it's my signature, and therefore, believe me that like by the kiyum of every shtar, that this is my signature. So you can't mix 2 different takanas of the chachamim to be machsher this get. It's a very big chiddush of Rav Ashi. Taisvis asks, that you can ask the same question on Rav Ashi. The same shliach, if he would just say a little bit different words, instead of saying this is my signature, if he wouldn't reveal the fact that it's his signature, he would just say that b'fanai nichtav, b'fanai nachtav, the whole thing was signed in front of me, he would be believed. So Taisus over here adds a svara, I think Taisus brings it here from the Yerushalmi, that regarding the signature, when he says the second signature is my signature, he's a shtikol negeya bedavar. He's saying that this is my signature, so now he's showing that it's me, it's my signature. So he's saying edus about himself, so it's called a negeya. It's a negeya bedavar. Even though it's not really called a proper negeya bedavar, usually that's how you verify signatures. But because it's different type of testimonies, this is about someone else's signature, and this is about your own signature, we can't combine these two things. Okay, so those are the three different chidushim Rav Chisda, Rave, and Rav Ashi said about this case. Now the Gemara brings here the lashon of the Mishnah itself, and we'll ask on Rav Chisda. Sagt the Gemara, Tanan, what did it say in the Mishnah? B'fanei nichtav kuloi, b'fanei nichtam chetzai. That the shliach came and said that the whole get was written in front of him, and only one signature was signed in front of him. What did the Mishnah say? Posel. That the get is going to be posel. So the question is, Ida Chetze, the other signature that he did not testify about. Hey Chidami, what's the story with that other signature? Ileime, the leke the kamase dale klau. What the Mishnah means to say is that on that second signature, nobody's testifying about it at all. Why does the Mishnah have to tell me that in such a case the get is posel? There's no chiddush in here. Why? Because hashta. Doesn't the Mishnah already tell me? Echad oime b'fanei nichta. If there's one shliach testifying that the whole get was written in front of him, and ve'echad oime b'fanei nichtam, and another is testifying that the both signatures were in front of him. The high kamasid akula ksive. So there's one shliach that's testifying for the whole get written, and the high kamasid akula chasima, and there's another shliach that's testifying for both signatures. Posel. So still the Mishnah says it's going to be posel. Chetziyai mibaya. Does the Mishnah have to tell me this halacha that if the shliach only testified about one signature and not about the other, of course it'll be posel. What is the Mishnah teaching me here? So the Gemara says, Elo, so you must say, the chiddush here is not in this very case that the Mishnah says. Elo, rather, the Mishnah here is coming to teach me, Oy kederave, Oy kederav Ashi. You have to add to the Mishnah that the case here is either like Rave said when you have two Eidim that are testifying about the second signature, or like Rav Ashi, which said that the case is that the shliach himself is saying that the second signature is my signature, that in those cases, the Mishnah is saying it's still going to be posel. That was the chiddush of our Mishnah. But ulafuke mid Rav Chisda. But this excludes of the chiddush that Rav Chisda said that when you have two Eidim that came and testified on the second signature, that it would be kosher. The Mishnah is coming to exclude of the chiddush of Rav Chisda. What's the pshat in the Gemara? Why are we excluding the chiddush of Rav Chisda? So Rashi explains that the pshat in the Gemara here is based on the concept of tafasta meruba loy tafasta. If the Mishnah is saying something that at first glance there's no chiddush in it, there has to be some additional detail in the case of the Mishnah that you have to add in order for the Mishnah to be a chiddush. So what chiddush is the Mishnah saying? Tafasta meruba loy tafasta. The Mishnah is not saying the biggest chiddush, which is Rav Chisda's case. When two Eidim are testifying about the second signature, the Mishnah must be saying a smaller chiddush, which is what Rav has said. When he's saying Eidos together with a second person, or Rav Ashi's chiddush, which is also a smaller chiddush. In other words, if the Mishnah is not specifying what the chiddush of this case is, we would be forced to say that the chiddush is the smaller chiddush of Rav and Rav Ashi, and not the greater chiddush of Rav Chisda. So if it's not the greater chiddush of Rav Chisda, so then that excludes what Rav Chisda says. If the Mishnah would have meant Rav Chisda's chiddush, the Mishnah would have definitely had to specify that. The fact that the Mishnah did not specify that greater chiddush, it means that the Mishnah is only alluding to the chiddush of Rav or Rav Ashi, excluding Rav Chisda's chiddush. That is the raya from the Gemara against Rav Chisda. Amalach Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda answers to this, your whole approach over here is incorrect. The Gemara's approach over here is that you can't learn the Mishnah literally because there is no chiddush in what the Mishnah is saying. So therefore you have to add something to the Mishnah which would exclude Rav Chisda's chiddush because it's too great of a chiddush. Tefasta merubah tefasta. But says Rav Chisda, but according to this approach, b'fanei nichtav. How about the case where the Mishnah says, the shliach says b'fanei nichtav, avuloi b'fanei nichtav. The shliach does not say anything. He doesn't say testimony for the signatures. Lamali. Why does the Mishnah have to say this case? This is also not a chiddush. The Mishnah here brings a couple of cases, and you see clearly that the Mishnah is bringing cases that are not a chiddush at all. Ella, so you can't say that in every single case that the Mishnah brings that you have to add something to the Mishnah and that there's a chiddush here. It's not necessarily a chiddush. Ella, rather, this is the style of the way the Tana writes. Loizu afzu katani. The Mishnah writes in such a way that it starts with a smaller chiddush and then it says a bigger chiddush. So Hachanami over here as well, Loizu Afsu Katani. If you go through the Mishnah, so the Mishnah is bringing a smaller Chiddush, then it goes to a bigger Chiddush and a bigger Chiddush, even though once it says the biggest Chiddush, it's not necessary to say all the smaller Chiddushim before, but over here as well, in the Mishnah, it starts off with a case where the Shliach is saying that it wasn't signed in front of me at all, and then it goes to a case where half of it was signed in front of him, and so on. The Mishnah is saying over here, different cases, even though there's no Chiddush in each one of them. So therefore, there's no raya against Rav Chisda because what the Mishnah says, it says, and you don't have to add anything to the Mishnah. Okay, so that's the conclusion of this subject. Now, the Gemara brings up another statement that Rav Chisda said, which is not at all related to the halachas of a get, but it's connected to the point that we said before. What did Rav Chisda say? That you can't combine two different takonis of the Chachamim to verify the kashrus of a get. Similar, the Gemara is now going to discuss another scenario where you sort of want to combine two things. Amar Rav Chisda says, and this is regarding a reshus hayachid on Shabbos. What turns a reshus into a reshus hayachid on Shabbos? A private domain where you're allowed to carry in it on Shabbos. It has to have an enclosure of 10 tfachim high. How do you get an enclosure of 10 tfachim high? Usually, it's with a fence or a wall around this area. Or you could have maybe a hill that is enclosing this area from all four sides or all three sides that are 10 tfachim high. That's one option. Another option is if you have a pit in the ground and it has the walls from the ground around it that's 10 tfachim high. So Rav Chisda says, Gidud chamisha. Umechitza chamisha, if you have gidud chamisha, gidud means that it's in the ground, it's a pit in the ground, and you have the embankment of the earth around it. That is the height of 5 tvachim. And then you have, on top of that, a wall, which is 5 tvachim high. So you have a height of 10 tvachim, but it's not from the same type of wall. There's half wall and half from the ground itself. You can't combine these two together to be 10 tvachim high to consider the inside to be a reshus hayachid. It has to be all by the wall of 10 tvachim, or all of it would be by the height of the embankment of the earth around it would be the height of 10 tvachim. One or the other. That's Rashi's pshat, which is a huge chiddush because you're inside it and you are surrounded by 10 tvachim high, but nevertheless, you can't combine these two. Taisvus disagrees with Rashi. Taisvus says the fact is it's surrounded by 10 tvachim high, and you see from other Gemaras that it'll be considered a reshus hayachid. Taisvus says what it means is if a person threw something from a reshus harabim and it landed right on top of the wall, so then this person that threw from the reshus harabim will not be chayiv because on top of the wall, that wall itself is only 5 tvachim high, and you don't combine it together with the rest of the other part of the mechitza which goes into the ground. That's one of the pshatim that Taisus over here says. Taisus has another pshat, but Taisus does not learn the Gemara kipshutai. Okay, the Gemara starts here another inyan, it goes into the next Talmud. We'll stop over here.